I think most everybody knows by now that you can save a lot of money by buying the 64 gigabyte version of the Steam Deck and then upgrading the internal storage yourself. And in this video, I'm going to show you the two ways that I think currently are the best, cheapest ways to increase the storage. Hey everybody, it's Chris from FamilyGeekery, and today we are going to be upgrading the storage on my Steam Deck here. This is a 64 gigabyte version. Of course, they come in three different sizes: the 64 gig, the 256 gig, and the 512. And the price goes up dramatically as you go from size to size. The 64 gig version of the Steam Deck is about $130 cheaper than the next model up, which is the 256. Now there is a difference, of course, with the 64 gig having the eMMC versus the NVMe and the 256. And in this video, I'm going to show you what we can do to get more storage and also more performance on our 64 gig without breaking the bank. Definitely saving a lot more than that $130. So the first option we have is probably a no-brainer, and everybody knows you can throw a micro SD card in here to increase the storage. With that micro SD card, as long as it's a good enough performance card, then you can go ahead and install the games right on there and run the games from there. And there's a big speed difference between, let's say, if you did have an NVMe drive in here and an SD card, but once you get into the game, I don't know if it's going to be that noticeable between the two. It's mostly going to be noticeable when you're copying files, maybe downloading games, installing games, moving games from the card to the internal storage or back and forth, or, load times on games. There's been a lot of great tests to see if the load times are that much dramatic, and I don't think they are, but we're gonna see what it feels like once we get this thing in here. So this is the Samsung Evo Select, which from what I understand is Amazon's exclusive branding for the Samsung drive, and it's basically essentially the same thing as the Samsung Evo Plus drive. This is just what Amazon calls it, and I think they sell both, but this is their Amazon exclusive. Speed-wise, this is 130 megabits, so it's a step down from the Samsung Pro Plus, which is the top dog, basically. But I think that one's like 150 megabytes per second versus the 130, and but it's about twice the price. Right now, this Evo Select is on sale, and it's almost half the price of the Pro Plus. So for 512 gigs, that was a heck of a deal to get this thing around like 30 or 40 bucks, and it's going to allow us to have more storage in the Steam Deck than if we just bought the top of the line one in the first place. So let's go ahead and open this up and get it installed in here and see how to both format the card and have the games install on the card. Alright, so here's our 512 gigabyte micro SD card. It's hard to believe you get half a terabyte on this tiny little thing. But let's go ahead and pop it into the bottom of our Steam Deck. And then from there, what we need to do is we hit the Steam button. We're going to go down to Settings. We're going to go to System. And then we're going to arrow down to Format SD Card. So once we hit this, it's going to confirm, hey, I'm about to wipe everything off this card, so make sure it's either brand new or it doesn't have anything on there that you need. And we're going to hit Confirm. And first it's going to test the card to see if it's got a good enough speed. I've read that if this test fails the first time, you can take the card out, put it back in, and try it again. But hopefully we're going to see this thing pass. Alright, and it's passed the test apparently, because now it's formatting. And there we go. So now let's go ahead and back out and go down to Storage. And we can see we've got an internal drive and a micro SD card. So the internal, you can see I only put a couple games on here. A couple small games, really. And it's almost halfway full, and this was a 64 gig again version. So now we've got about 10 times. So it says 46 gig is how much is free from after all the OS and stuff is installed on there. So with 468 gigabytes free on that 512 card, we've got about 10 times the internal storage now. Alright, the next thing you want to do is make sure that whichever drive you want to be the default drive to install new games on, you select that here. So in the same storage menu, you can see I've got a little gold star there next to the micro SD card that I just formatted, and I'm guessing it made that the default since it's so much bigger, and since I just formatted it, they must have figured that I want to use that drive now. But you can change that back and forth by hitting X on either one of the drives. So on internal drive, if I hit X, then it makes it default, and now it's got the gold star, or I can bring it back to the micro SD card and hit X, and now the games will install in there by default. Alright, now the next thing I want to show you is, now that you've got the micro SD card in there, maybe you want to move some of your games that you've already installed over. Maybe your drive is getting too full, and you don't want your internal drive to ever get too full, because that's where it's going to download its updates for the OS, and it's going to also have some cache files that saves in there. So let's go ahead and move one of these games over so you see how easy it is. So we're still here in the storage settings. We're just going to go to our internal drive and pick one of these games, maybe Shop Titans, and right down here it says Y, move content. So I'm going to hit Y. It's going to give me a list of the available drives, which in my case is only one. So I'm going to hit the micro SD card, and we come down to move, and that's all there is to it. It's going to start moving this over to the SD card, and you can see that this card is definitely fast. Only took about 4 or 5 seconds to move over that 1 or 2 gigabyte file, and now it's done. It's that easy. So now if we go back and we look at our 2 drives, you can see that we've got our Shop Titans here on the micro SD card, and all the rest of them are still on the internal, and we can tell by the gold star there that new games are going to be downloaded to the micro SD card. Alright, so far so good. So we've installed a huge SD card on there, and we've copied some games over. In fact, I've copied all of my games over to that new drive, and let me tell you why. Because the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of that 64 gig eMMC drive, and we're going to install an NVMe. So the size of NVMe drive that they have inside the Steam Deck is called a 2230, and that stands for 22 millimeters on the width and then 30 millimeters of length. So this thing is tiny, and this is the size that needs to go in here. So historically speaking, they didn't make a lot of these in a huge variety, so now companies are finally starting to make them because everybody wants to upgrade their Steam Deck. So you can get these in 1 terabyte and 2 terabytes, but they're a lot more expensive than the standard like 2280 that you'd use in a bigger laptop or in a desktop computer. So this particular drive here is one that I found on Amazon, and apparently somebody is just taking these out of brand new laptops and putting in bigger drives into the laptops. And so this is brand new. At least that's what they said. I have no reason to not believe them. And if we look at the manufacture date, it says April of 2022. So whether it was brand new or not, it's still fairly new. So I'm pretty happy with it. It was only like $25. So it's 256 gigs for $25. If we think about the 256 gig version of the Steam Deck, we said it was $130 more than the 64. So we're saving $100 just by doing this ourselves. So getting this NVMe drive into the Steam Deck is not going to be quite as easy as just plugging in the micro SD card and formatting it. What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to actually take this thing apart, and I'll show you how to do that. We're going to take out the eMMC card, and we're going to install this, and then after that we're going to have to get the operating system onto this drive, because the operating system lives on that eMMC drive that we are going to pull out of there. So that's going to require a couple more things. We're going to need to flash the OS, the SteamOS installer, onto a thumbstick. So you're going to need a thumbstick, and then we're going to need some way to plug that thumbstick into our USB-C device here. So some kind of a USB-C hub to do that. Hey everybody, it's Future Chris here. Just wanted to show you first that everything did work out. I've got 256 gig NVMe drive plus my 512 gig SSD. And to make this happen, I didn't even need to use this dock. You can use a small micro SD card, so just a small cheap one, and then as long as you have some way of plugging this into a computer. So you could either use a drive reader, or you could use an adapter like this if you've got a card slot on your laptop. So I'll let you get back, but I just wanted to let you know you don't have to worry about buying a dock if you don't want to. We'll be able to install SteamOS off of this right inside here. So let's get started on installing the NVMe drive. So before we get started, it's been said that it's recommended to have the battery drained down to less than 25% of its life, and that's because the lithium battery that's inside here, if it gets punctured, then it can be real dangerous if it's got a full charge on it. Well, I don't intend on puncturing it in the first place, but I did go ahead and let this drain down some. So after that, the next thing you're going to do is turn this completely off. So don't just put it into sleep mode. We're going to actually hold down the power button, bring up the power menu, and we're going to go all the way down to shutdown and confirm. So we want this thing powered completely off before we start taking it apart. Alright, now for the fun part, taking apart your beautiful Steam Deck. Now make sure, of course, you're going to lay this down on something soft. This is like a desk mouse pad type thing, so you don't want to scratch up your screen. And then the next thing you want to do is collect all your tools. So to get this done, we're going to need a screwdriver with a Phillips. I've got a Phillips 0. You can use either a 0 or a 00 to get these little screws out. I've got a magnetic pad here to organize all my screws once I take them out, because we're going to have some on the outside here, and we're going to have a couple screws on the inside also. And I've got a pair of tweezers. One of the steps inside is going to require that. And then to separate the case apart, some kind of pry tool, like these like guitar pick looking things. Now all of these tools here that I've got, the drive and everything, all come from my trusty Strabito kit that I always talk about on the channel, and I've got a link to that below, of course. Cheap kit that's got all the parts that you can need. So once you get everything ready, the first step is going to be to remove these 8 screws from around the case. And when you do those, you want to remember where they go, but it's nice and easy to remember. The short ones are going to be in the middle, and then the longer 4 are going to be on the outside. So let me go ahead and take these out. Alright, while you're doing that, make sure that you don't strip out any of the screws when you're doing it. Make sure you have the correct size screw tip and that it's not kind of stripping around. So I'm going to take a second here to organize these so I can remember where they go. And then once we get inside, I'm going to take, and over here I'm going to put the ones that were inside. So the next step is going to be separating the case, the back of the case off, and we're going to use a little pry tool for that. Alright, so before we take the plastic case off, now would be a good time to check to make sure you have taken out your micro SD card. So you definitely want that out before you start removing the case. Should have done it before I took the screws out, but that's okay. So we'll set this to the side. We definitely don't want to lift this case off with that. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to start on the right handle. So if we're looking at it this way, our right handle, and we're going to start up at the very top here. Now remember, this is all plastic and we don't want to scratch it up, so if you don't have the right tools, don't just grab a knife from the kitchen and try to do this, because you will scratch up your plastic. So we want to separate about right here to start with. So I'm going to use this pry tool and see how that works. We also have this guy here if we need to kind of slide it around. But I think the first clip we're looking for is going to be right about here. So I'm going to put the angled part in. There we go. So once you get about this much done, it's going to be a lot easier, because now that's not going to close by itself. So from this point, you can either switch over to this guy and kind of work it around, depending on how sturdy this is. And we're just going to work all the way around and kind of release those clips. And you can see why we definitely wanted to have that SD card out, because this would have snapped that thing in half. And then just work it around until we get enough of it popped up that we can gently separate the back off. So now we're inside. Alright, so if it's not obvious, we don't want to touch any of the stuff in here, especially with metal objects. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get this battery disconnected. And to get that battery disconnected, we're going to have to take this shield off first. So the shield has 3 screws. 2 of them you can see, one right here and one up top here, and those are both the same length. And then there was one hidden underneath this little piece of foil tape here. So that's what the tweezers are for. If you don't have tweezers, you can just use your fingernail or something. So I'm just going to try to pry this up a little bit, get to where we can see that screw, and then we can always put that back down once we're done. So let's take these 3 screws out. And this is when having a nice screwdriver with the magnetic bit definitely helps. You definitely don't want to drop these tiny little screws inside the Steam Deck somewhere. And in this case, with these screws, we can tell that these 2 are the same size, and this one is a little bit shorter and a little bit bigger head, so it'll be easy to remember which one goes where. So now that we got those 3 screws out, this shield should come straight up. And that's going to expose both the drive that we're in here looking for and the battery connector right here. Alright, so if you've gotten this far, don't get excited and take this thing out right away. We do want to take the battery and disconnect it from the rest of the machine here. So this little connector here, 2 ways of getting it out. One, you can grab it by the cable and pull it. That's a viable way. I don't like grabbing cables and pulling them, but there is a little tiny plastic ridge here, and my Strabito kit also has this little poker that's got like a straight spudger on it. And I'm thinking that's going to fit right into this little ridge here. I'm going to be able to push the connector right out. Alright, and that seemed to have removed it. So let's go ahead and alright, now this connector is free from its socket. Alright, now for the moment we've been waiting for. So this little chip here has just 1 screw holding it down. So we're going to take that screw out. And at this point, if you've ever built a computer with an NVMe drive before, then you know exactly what's happening here. This is basically inserted into a slot this way. So it's going to come up after you take the screw out, and then we can just lift it kind of diagonally out of the socket. And if you want to wiggle it a tiny bit left and right, and it comes right out. So now you can see how the thing sits in there, and that's how we're going to put the other one back in. But first we need to take this little foil jacket off. I believe this foil jacket is here to help heat dissipation, and it's very important, they say, to keep that on there. So for the little heat guy here, you can either peel it apart here, and we're going to put it on the new one, or you can kind of slip it right out like a sleeve, and that's what I'm going to do. So you can just slide it right off. That exposes our old chip. Let's put that to the side, and then I'll go ahead and grab the new one, and we'll put it back in here and insert it back into the slot. So here's our new NVMe drive. And if we look at the little offset here, it's a little bit different than the eMMC. And on this one, if we look on the socket, there's also a missing set of pins here. So you got all these little pins and then a couple pins over here. and the little gap there, that's how you're going to orient this guy. So let's go ahead and slide our new drive back into the foil sleeve. So make sure when you slide the sleeve on that these little tails are about flush with the edge of the card, and that's going to expose the little screw hole here. And we're just going to put it in at a slight angle, just like it came out. And you're going to push it all the way into the socket. Make sure you don't see any gold contacts here, because that may mean that the card is askew. And once we got that like that, we're going to make sure we pick the right screw, load it up on our screwdriver, hopefully magnetic, because these NVMe screws can be a real pain in the butt if they're not. And I'm just going to hold this down here. Make sure that the little semicircle that's holding it down is seated well in this little screw hole socket. And let's go ahead and put the mounting screw back down. And our new drive is now installed. So now it's just basically everything in reverse. We're going to reattach the battery cable, put the shield back down, put the screws in, put the back on, and then we're going to have to start getting ready for the software. Alright, once you get the battery cable back into the socket, we want to make sure it's fully seated. So I'm just going to grab it with my fingernail and kind of pull it left. And I did feel, so basically there's some little tiny pins in there, and you saw when we took the cable off that there's a bunch of holes, and I did feel when I pushed that it felt like those pins went all the way into the hole. So now that's down, we're going to replace our shield, and make sure when we place this down we don't accidentally short anything on the motherboards with this metal. We just want to put it straight down where it came from, and make sure that all the screw holes are going to line up. Alright, so I'm going to start with the middle screw here, and then the two left side screws. Alright, and the rest of these screws here are going to be held down by the screws that hold the case down. You can see the 1, 2, 3, 4 holes here. So these two shields are going to be held down that same way. So make sure they are kind of lined up before we put this plastic back on. We don't want to have to take that back off. Alright, don't forget to put our foil back over the screw hole. Just kind of smooth it out a little bit. And now we're ready to put the back case back on. So I'm going to kind of go the opposite direction. I'm going to start over on this side, make sure everything's lined up, and then just give it a little squeeze. And work that all the way around to that last snap. Alright, now the case is on. Now let's get the screws back in. So remember, the long screws go on the outside, the short screws go on the inside. Alright, it's all back together. Alright, so now that the drive is installed and this is all put back together, we're actually going to set this aside and we're going to do a couple things on a computer. So make sure you have a computer or laptop of some sort, and we're going to use that to download and make our installer for the SteamOS. Alright, so we've finished up with the Steam Deck, and while we're going to do the computer part, I've got the Steam Deck plugged back into its charger so I can get that battery back up to a good level. So here we are on the computer. We're going to do a couple steps because we need to get that image, that SteamOS recovery image, burned onto something so we can install it back into the Steam Deck. Now we've got a couple options here. I said before that you can use a thumb drive as long as you have some way of getting that thumb drive plugged into USB-C. Now, a dock like this would work because we have the USB-A inputs. We plug this into the Steam Deck, and it still gives us a place for power delivery in, so we can keep the Steam Deck charging while we're doing all the software, because that's important, because the software is going to take a while, and you don't want, you never want a machine to to run out of battery while it's flashing anything. So this is one option. Another option is, since the Steam Deck has a micro SD card reader in it, we can just take a spare card reader or spare micro SD card, and as long as we can flash the image onto here, then we can just pop this right into the Steam Deck. So you can either use the full-size adapter if your computer has an SD card slot, or you can use something like this USB card reader, and we just pop this guy in here, and we're going to use this to burn, and then take this out, pop it into the Steam Deck. Alright, so before we do any of that, we need to get some things downloaded. So the first thing we need is some kind of flashing tool. So I always use Balena Etcher. So just go to balena.io, and it gives you a couple options. You can do this on Mac, Windows, Linux, and I always grab this Etcher for Windows Portable. So you don't have to install it unless you're going to be using this over and over again. I just download the Portable, and then that way right from the download directory where you download it, you can run it, and it looks just like this. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is go to Steam and download the recovery image. So the first step is here. It says download the recovery image. Click here, and it says, hey, read all this mumbo jumbo, agree to it, and download. And then once you download that, then you'll have the image downloaded, ready to burn. Alright, once you got everything downloaded, then we're going to go ahead and open up Etcher. And in Etcher, we're going to select the file that we want to flash from. So we're going to open this up. Just go to wherever we downloaded that recovery image and hit open. Then we want to select our target. What are we going to burn this to? So we can open that up. And I've actually got, I use the same hub as basically a card reader, since I think this will be a little bit quicker than this one. So we just make sure that you pick the correct one. Now this drive needs to be at least 8 gigabytes, I believe. This one happens to be 32, but you can use an 8 or 16, whatever you got lying around. And make sure you don't select the hard drive of your computer, of course. So we're just going to pick the, in this case, generic micro SD, and select that. Once we verified, here's the Steam Deck image. Here's where we're going to burn it to. We click this flash button, and we let it do its thing. So this is going to take a little while to burn, and I'll be back when it's done. Alright, so I got the image burned onto the little micro SD card here, and you can see as soon as I plugged this in to charge it, it came up and it tried to boot, and it says obviously the default boot device is missing. So I'm just going to go ahead and shut this off. And now we're ready to insert the micro SD card. And to boot this up into recovery mode, we're going to hold the volume down button and then press the power button. Alright, so after a couple minutes of booting up, it did finally get to this recovery area here. And remember, it's a good idea to go ahead and keep your charger plugged in while you're doing this. If you've got a thumb drive plugged into, a dock like this, make sure you are feeding into the power delivery port from your charger. Don't use something like this simple USB-C to, USB-A for your thumb drive, because then you won't have any way of powering that. But since I'm using the SD card here, then I've got the power port open here. So we've got a couple options on here, and I don't think any of these buttons or anything are going to work, but the touchscreen does work. So there is one here that says Reimage Steam Dock or Steam Deck. So I'm going to click on that, and it says this action will reimage the Steam Deck. It'll permanently destroy all the data on the Steam Deck and reinstall the SteamOS. This can't be undone. Well, that's fine because we already took out the old drive, so we're not destroying anything. We got a brand new drive in there. So let's go ahead and tap on proceed, and then now we're just going to let it do its thing. Alright, for me that took about 5 minutes, and it says reimaging complete. Choose proceed to reboot. Looking good. And now it's completely reset just like it was when you first pulled it out of the box. So I'm going to go ahead and get this all re-signed in again. and I'll be right back. Alright, we're all logged in, and next we want to just go and check to make sure that everything looks good in the settings and the storage. So let's go to settings, scroll down to storage, and there we can see internal drive 226 gigabytes free. So we've got ourselves a NVMe drive now. Let's go ahead and add back in the card that we added in beginning and see if our games are still there. So I just popped out the card that I used to install SteamOS, popped that 512 gig card in there. It came up right away. It even moved the Gold Star over to it. And if we look, here's all the games that I had backed up before. And let's see if Steam recognizes that they're installed. So if I go back up here to my recent games, it says play here instead of install. So that's good. So now I've got about 750 gigabytes of storage on the Steam Deck for probably about $65 total, instead of paying an extra $130 just to have that 256 gig NVMe drive in there. So now I've got a real NVMe drive as the boot drive, basically, and I've got some extra storage for games. And if the games run great off of that, that's perfect. If you are more concerned about them running faster, then you can always copy them over onto the internal drive, run them from there, and then if you go several weeks without playing them, you can copy them back over to the storage drive and save yourself space on the main drive. So one thing I forgot to mention before we got started on this is if you have any games that don't back up to Steam Cloud, then you want to make sure that you do back those up manually beforehand. Back up those saves manually before you start doing this. Worst case scenario, you still have this drive here, and you should be able to plug this in if you used something like an NVMe drive caddy that you could plug it in, and then this gives you either a USB-C or USB-A connection, and you should be able to copy those save files over if you forgot to do that beforehand. So I think we've accomplished our mission today, and basically what I wanted to do is enable you to get rid of your eMMC drive and put in a real NVMe drive without breaking the bank, and then also increase your overall storage by using a decent quality but still inexpensive SD card. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it helped you out. I hope it got you where you wanted to be. Now remember, all these steps that we did here, if you wanted to do this with a 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte NVMe drive, same exact steps. I just went cheap with a 256, but you can use any size that you want and accomplish the same thing. So if this video was helpful to you, remember to hit that like button because it helps me out a lot. And if you want to see more stuff like this, we got some more Steam Deck review type stuff coming up. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. But thank you as always for watching, and until next time, peace out and geek out.